So much for joining Kidney Conversations. It is so wonderful to see such a range of supporters here today from across Kidney Research UK. This week marks Organ Donation Week, and we are here to celebrate some of our life-changing kidney transplantation research. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to run through some quick housekeeping. The event today will be recorded. I hope it is. I'll just check. Yes. And so that it can be shared with supporters who wish to attend but couldn't. Please do stay on mute, but if you are comfortable, please have your camera on so our speakers can see you. To ask a question to one of our researchers, please use the chat function. We'll be asking as many questions as we can live, but if your question isn't answered, we will follow up with you post-event. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. So, my name is Neerja Jain, and I'm the Health Equalities Programme Manager at Kidney Research UK. I'm passionate about transforming kidney health and ensuring everyone has equal access to treatments. I'm a kidney nurse by background, having worked in the NHS in Birmingham for many years. Most of my clinical experience has actually been in transplantation. I've been motivated to explore inequalities for some time, and indeed my master's focused on addressing inequalities in living kidney donation. I've been working at Kidney Research UK for 18 years, where I focus on improving health equality in kidney disease. I also project manage the UK Organ Donation and Transplantation Research Network. This is a pan-organ UK first, so all organs, not just kidneys. The overarching aim of the network is to create a UK multidisciplinary collaboration between patients, scientists, clinicians, and other stakeholders, with the ultimate aim to optimise organ donation and utilisation, and therefore improve outcomes for transplant patients. So back in 2013, we launched our Making Every Kidney Count appeal. We funded 5 research projects aimed at increasing the number of viable kidneys for transplantation, so more kidney patients could receive a life-changing transplant, as well as ensuring the success of more kidney transplants. We have 3 of these incredible researchers here with us today to update us on their projects and what it will mean for kidney patients. I'm really excited that we are joined by Professor Mike Nicholson, Professor Fred Tam, and Dr. Sean Griffin. They're going to give an overview and update on their research projects with time for questions at the end of each of their talks. We'll also hear from Deborah Bakewell, whose life was transformed thanks to these life-changing research projects. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, and that is Professor Mike Nicholson. Mike is a transplant surgeon at Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge. His team have developed a pioneering technique to increase the quality and lifespan of kidney transplants. So I'm delighted that he can update us on its progress. Over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. My Kidney Research UK funded research is about trying to improve the preservation of kidneys before they're transplanted using a new technique called normothermic machine perfusion, which I'll probably just keep calling perfusion. In the interval between removing a kidney from the donor and transplanting it into the recipient, kidneys have traditionally been stored in crushed ice in the equivalent of a plastic cool box. This is a refrigeration method, and it's simple and inexpensive, and it works well, but it is time limited because the kidney is not receiving any oxygen at all. And just as food left in the fridge eventually deteriorates, so does a kidney stored in ice. Normothermic machine perfusion is completely different. We use a system that has been developed using the technology for open heart surgery, using a heart-lung machine, if you like. The kidney is housed in a chamber, and its blood vessels are connected to a circuit of plastic tubing. The circuit contains a pump, a centrifugal pump, which is the equivalent of the heart, and a membrane oxygenator, the equivalent of the lungs. The circuit's primed with a solution that contains red blood cells that we get from the blood bank, and this is warmed to body temperature. So the system allows us to circulate warmed, oxygen-rich blood-like solution through the kidney to mimic the conditions in the body. So our informal description of this process is pumping the kidney. We can add various things to the blood. For example, the anti-inflammatory steroid dexamethasone, which you'll all have heard of as being so effective in the treatment of severe COVID infections. Now, we've used normothermic machine perfusion in 3 distinct ways. The first was to deliver the world's first clinical trial comparing the outcome of kidney transplants after normothermic machine perfusion or cold storage in ice. And this was funded by the Kidney Research UK Making Every Kidney Count initiative or appeal. In the COVID era, everyone's aware now of how important trials are to see if a particular treatment works. And the scientific way of conducting a trial is to randomly allocate a patient, or in this case a kidney, to one treatment or another. And this is effectively done on the toss of a coin. So there's a 50-50 chance of getting either treatment. And that prevents any bias in allocating better kidneys to one treatment or another. And if enough patients are recruited, then the 2 groups will be matched for factors such as donor age, which we know will influence the outcome. So the end point of our trial was whether a kidney transplant worked immediately after it was transplanted. In other words, the recipient was off dialysis immediately. Because we know that when a kidney works immediately, the patient is in hospital for a shorter period of time, it costs the NHS less money, and more importantly, there's accumulating evidence that if a kidney works well to start with, then it will survive better in the long term. So the exciting news is that the trial is complete, and it includes recruitment of 338 patients. But I can't share the results with you yet because they're being analysed as we speak by NHS Blood and Transplant, and but the answer will be available in the next few months, which is very exciting. The second way we've used normothermic machine perfusion is as a tool for deciding on the quality of a particular kidney, particularly marginal kidneys or kidneys from old donors that have been declined for transplantation in units throughout the UK. And sadly, this happens to several hundred deceased donor kidneys that are removed from donors every year. And the reason it happens is because the receiving transplant surgeons aren't sure whether the kidney is good enough to be used and whether it will function when it's transplanted. So they tend to err on the side of caution and not offer the kidney to anybody. But our perfusion system, by pumping the kidney with blood outside the body, reanimates the organ and gives the surgeon much more information about the quality of the kidney. We can see what it looks like with blood flowing through it. Is it pink and healthy, for example? We can measure the rate of blood flowing through it, and we can see if it produces urine. And then finally, we can take a biopsy sample of the kidney to look at under the microscope to assess for damage. So in another world first trial funded by Kidney Research UK, we have perfused 29 kidneys that had been turned down by all the transplant units in the UK. These kidneys were headed for the incinerator. And out of the 29, we transplanted 17 after we'd assessed them on our machine. That's nearly 60%. And when transplanted, there was a 90% success rate at a year. So this provides proof of principle that if rolled out across the UK, this could provide kidney transplants, we calculate, for more than 100 extra patients every year. Then finally, the third way in which we've been researching machine perfusion is as a platform to deliver treatments to repair kidneys that have been damaged before they're transplanted. And we're particularly keen to address this problem of delayed graft function where the kidney doesn't work immediately. And in order to think about that, we need to consider the microscopic structure of the kidney, which is a beautiful design. So a human kidney has about 1 million tiny sieves in it, or filtration units, and each sieve is connected to a tangled tube. So the blood is filtered through the sieve, and the fluid that's pushed through is altered by the tubule and turned into the urine. We know that delayed graft function is caused by the cells that line the tubules dying, falling into the tubule and blocking it, so preventing the formation and flow of urine. So what we've been doing is we've been using normothermic machine perfusion to deliver stem cells taken from neonates' urine into the kidney while it's put on the perfusion machine, and the aim is to try and repair the damaged tubular lining using stem cells, which, as you know, can turn into any type of a cell in the body if given the right conditions. And I think this type of research has the potential to be really transformative in the future. So I see that my time's up, and I'll conclude by saying that none of this work could have been done without the generous donations that people make to Kidney Research UK. And I believe we're entering a period of unprecedented opportunity to really make a difference, a major impact to the care of patients receiving a kidney transplant. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mike. Kidneys are the most in-demand organ for transplant. In the UK alone, there are around 5,000 people on the UK kidney transplant waiting list, but only 3,500 operations are carried out each year. Increasing the available pool of donor kidneys will be life-changing for so many kidney patients. So Mike, I'd now like to ask you a few questions that have been sent in, if I may. I will just check there's nothing live, but we've got a couple. How have patients been involved in the design of your study?
Okay, so we are part of a National Institute for Health Research, Blood and Transplant Research, and as part of that unit, we have equal partners who are representing the public and the patients. And quite remarkably now, we have a panel of about 50 patients or members of the public that help us, and they're involved right throughout the unit, and they're involved always with our research. And it's developed really very interestingly. It started with patients just listening to what we were doing and perhaps asking some questions, but it's moved on to patients being involved in what is called co-production. In other words, they help us to decide which questions should be answered and how we should go about conducting the research to answer those questions. So yes, patients are very involved in our work.
Thank you. Mike, I don't know if it's a problem on our side or whether it's deliberate. We can't see you, or I can't see you at the moment.
Yeah, I consider that to be you being really lucky, actually. But my camera's on and I can see myself in a little picture at the bottom. So.
Okay, all right. And then, yes, another one that's just come in. How long do the stem cells take to repair the damaged kidney?
Okay, so we don't know the answer to that yet, but it's because it's too far ahead. But the stem cells are really fascinating because we're using a particular type of stem cell. When a baby is growing in utero, the kidney develops for the first 34 weeks. So during that time, the kidney is full of kidney stem cells, which are making new kidney tissue. They're growing the kidney. Those stem cells are also shed into the urine. So we've had this really nice idea of you can take urine from preterm babies, and as long as they're less than 34 weeks old, their kidneys are still forming and they're packed full of stem cells which appear in the urine. And what we've shown so far is that you can take those stem cells out of the urine, grow them into a test tube, and they will make renal tubular cells. So what we know so far is that we can make renal tubular cells. We've also shown that the stem cells, when you put them in perfusion machine, they appear in the kidney. So that's the stage we're at the moment, and in the future we hope that we'll be able to take that forward so that we can repair damaged kidneys before they're transplanted.
Right, thank you. And then if the data currently, somebody else has asked, if the data currently under analysis is positive, will your procedures become part of standard operating procedures nationwide?
Yes, I think that's the intention, really. So there were 4 centres involved in the trial: Cambridge, Edinburgh, Newcastle, and Guy's Hospital in London. So, and there are about another 4 centres that have perfusion machines. So there would be a lot to do to introduce it, because there's 23 adult kidney transplant units in the UK, and most of them don't have perfusion machines at the moment. But we would hope to be able to develop that in the future. Another way of doing it is to have centres that perfuse kidneys as repair centres, and then send them out to all the other centres. So you might have a regional service one day in which every kidney is sent to be perfused, and then if it's okay, it's sent off to the appropriate centre for transplantation.
Thank you. And this may have to be the last question. Will this research assist in regards to understanding early graft rejection?
We haven't really been working in that area, other than yes, in a way. So one of the reasons why kidneys reject, the bit of kidney which causes rejection the most, are the white blood cells that come with the kidney, rather than the kidney cells themselves. So white blood cells last for about 6 weeks in a kidney, and then they're replaced by the recipient's own white blood cells. And that's one reason why the rejection process is quite common in the first few weeks and then peters out afterwards. So one of the things we've done on the machine is put a white blood cell filter in the machine. And then what happens is your kidney, the white cells in your kidney are moving into the kidney from the blood and then back out of the kidney into the blood. So we can remove, and we've shown that we can remove a whole load of really inflammatory white blood cells from the kidney itself, actually millions of cells, including the cells they're called antigen presenting cells, which start the rejection process. So yeah, we haven't done much work on that, but it also has potential.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mike. That's lovely. And if we haven't answered anybody else's questions, we will come back to you after the event, as I mentioned at the beginning. As a transplant nurse in my former life, I find it fascinating to see such advancements, such as Mike's work, being made, which then directly impact on patients, as you'll now hear. So I'm delighted to introduce Deborah Bakewell. Thanks to Professor Mike Nicholson and his team, she was the first person in the world to have a normothermic perfusion kidney transplant. Deborah has polycystic kidney disease, also known as PKD, a type of kidney disease that runs in the family. PKD causes small fluid-like cysts to form in the kidneys. Over time, the cysts enlarge, forming balloon-like swellings that gradually replace normal kidney tissue, and therefore reduce kidney function, leading to kidney failure. So welcome, Deborah.
Hello there. Hello.
Right. Good, I can hear and see you very well. So I've got 4 questions for Deborah, which she knows about. So if you're ready, I'll start off with the first one.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so can you tell us, Deborah, the impact of PKD on your family and how you knew you were starting to be affected by reduced kidney function?
Right. It was back in 1968. My sister was going to get married. My mum had told us about the issue within her family, but at that time she didn't think it was going to apply to her because it hadn't materialised, if you like. So Linda, my sister, got married, and at mid-20s, I then found that I was in terrible pain one day, and of course I was sent to hospital, bit of investigation, and lo and behold, I had the family polycystic kidneys. Meanwhile, of course, it was revealed also that Linda, my sister, had polycystic kidneys. So whilst Mum thought she had managed to, swerve that bullet, unfortunately, she too. It means that 100% of our family are polycystic kidneys. My sister actually, she did actually go on to have 2 children, and I had decided years ago not to have children, but when I got to the age of 30, I did actually change my mind, and I have got 1 biological son. So, but one of the doctors did say to me that that it means that in future life, our family knows that the hiccup they will have, whereas other families won't realise that somebody's going to have cancer or somebody's going to have motor neuron disease, etc. So perhaps it's something we can actually kind of not protect against, but certainly be prepared for. I worked full time, but by my mid-40s, I ended up, whilst I was in a career, I worked in a man's world career. I started to get very exhausted, but it wasn't until my early 50s or 52 that I actually had to have some form of dialysis. So I had automatic dialysis overnight, but the prescription I had was 9 hours a night, 7 nights a week. And of course, from then on, you're on a hamster wheel. The impact of kidney failure is a hamster wheel. Now, the actual dialysis did make me feel a lot better. So I did have a little bit more energy, but it's still not absolutely the replacement. So it was a real 6:30 in the morning, you unhook yourself from a machine, you leave for work at 8:10, you come back at 6:10, you prepare a meal, etc. And then of course the next thing is you're going to bed and you're getting back onto machine again. So it really is a hamster wheel, and it doesn't end. It's every weekend, it's Christmas, it's Boxing Day, it's everything. And of course, not only that, you've got the discipline of the renal diet. And if any researcher hasn't looked at the renal diet, just take a look, because you're not allowed to have crisps, potatoes, crisps, chocolate, but you're also not allowed to have Brussels sprouts and cabbage. So, you know, whilst it seems to be that you're trying to avoid and be healthy, there's no rhyme or reason to it. You can't have tomatoes and mushrooms. Well, that is in essence the Mediterranean diet out. And of course, a lot of people, I was one of the lucky ones, but a lot of people are on restricted fluid, which means ultimately they're looking at 3 cups of fluid a day, not mugs, but cups. How on earth somebody survives on that, I just do not know. But that's the impact to myself.
Nidja, you're on mute.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Deborah. You've perfectly illuminated there in just a few minutes the huge impact that can have on whole families. On to the next question. Can you tell us about the emotions of being on the transplant waiting list and how you felt when you were told there was a kidney for you?
Well, firstly, I didn't honestly think I'd ever qualify to be on a transplant list, because I did actually have a few issues as a child. I had bone cancer as a 12-year-old and had to have my leg amputated. And then I had a secondary when I was 13 and had part of my lung removed. So I really didn't think I'd ever be considered. So I was absolutely, amazed and really delighted to be actually on the transplant list. So the first 3 months of being on the transplant list, every phone call that comes into the family, your heart's pounding. And then after a while, you just start thinking, well, hold it a second, I'm never going to be lucky enough. However, it sort of calmed down a wee bit, but I didn't go on holiday or anything like that, purely because obviously I was still on dialysis. And I didn't dare leave the country just in case I was lucky enough to get the call. So that was the first thing, really. And also, to get to the actual specific phone call to say there is a kidney waiting for you. Again, on the journey from Lincoln to Leicester, my heart was in my mouth. My husband was trying to do small talk, and after 15 minutes I said, please just let me get my thoughts together. Because again, the idea is that when you get to the hospital, you still have to go through tests. You still aren't aware if you're going to be the lucky one. And it just happened that I was, the lucky one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Deborah. And I know so many patients have said the same to me, that when that call comes, there's a huge amount of mixed emotions. And again, you brought it all back to me. Right, we'll move on to the next question for you. So did you have any reservations about the kidney being damaged and therefore needing normothermic perfusion before transplant?
I'm laughing because Professor and I have already had a conversation about this years ago. I don't know if he recalls, but basically, the professor was really kind. He sat down and explained to me the whole procedure, and then, of course, he touched upon the fact that the kidney I was about to receive was damaged. How did I feel about that? However, he was confident that the research had proven that this kidney could potentially be viable. 9 hours a night, 7 days a week, I think, and I think that just kind of sums up, what did I have to lose? I had absolutely nothing to lose, and I trusted him, I trusted the research, I trusted his team. Why on earth wouldn't I say yes, please, go ahead, nothing to lose.
What a wonderful attitude, and I'm so glad it more than paid off. So last question, how has your life changed since having the transplant, Deborah?
I'm very aware we haven't got the whole afternoon. So I'm just going to say one word: freedom. Absolute freedom. I can now, within reason, eat what I would like. I can now visit again without the current restrictions. I can go on holiday, I can go abroad, I can visit my sister who lives in America now. And you know, it's just fantastic. I've also got 5 step-grandchildren, and they keep us busy. And again, I'm able to stay up late and, you know, be with them and be here for charades at sort of 9 o'clock at night at Christmas Day, that sort of thing, which of course I wasn't allowed to before. I was too busy hooked up somewhere else in a different part of the property. So yeah, freedom.
Wonderful, wonderful to hear, Deborah. And there are some lovely comments coming in the chat bar. When you've got a moment, you can have a look. And I know some people have sent in questions, which we'll take up with you afterwards. But for now, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, Deborah. I'm really delighted that your kidney transplant's working so well and strong, and that you're living life to the full. And I know personally, and I think I speak on behalf of many other healthcare professionals when I say it's always such a joy and a feeling of real satisfaction to see our patients getting back precious quality of life. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So on to our next speaker. I would now like to introduce Professor Fred Tam, who's going to update us on his research project focused on preventing kidney rejection. Fred is a world-leading renal researcher at the Ken and Mary Minton Chair of Renal Medicine at Imperial College London. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you. And I hope all of you can hear me okay. First of all, I'd like to thank all the audience joining us for this interesting meeting today. And I must thank Kidney Research UK for decades. They have been so encouraging and helping my research, and also setting up collaboration together to make this possible. And may I have the next slide, please? Now, one of the excitement about doing nephrology or kidney medicine is that transplantation has been a major success as a treatment for kidney failure over the years. And for many patients, the standard immunosuppressive medication have been really useful to keep the transplant kidney working all right. But we noticed that over a longer duration of time, some patients do get antibody-mediated rejection, and some of them go on for long term. And they are still a major area that we want to improve on to make a longer term success of kidney transplantation. Next, please. Now, some of my colleagues and my patients ask me, why do I interest in this molecule, spleen tyrosine kinase, or SYK? Now, this is interesting. This is one of the molecules in our body, in all of us, that can mediate antibody production and also inflammation. Under normal circumstances, they are very important for our health, but in the situation of transplant kidney rejection, they are the pathway that can make us make more antibody, which can contribute to rejection of kidney. And on top of that, once the antibody productions get going, they also activate the cell to make more of the sick that lead to inflammation and kidney injury. Next, please. Now, the research approach we have taken and have been supported by Kidney Research UK more than 5 years ago now. We analyzed the biopsy sample of patients with kidney transplant and then create a laboratory model to understand what does this molecule SIC actually mean to transplant rejection. And then based on those results, we managed to develop further clinical trials with support from other donations, partly through Imperial College as well. Next. Now here, I'll give you some sort of screenshots of what happened to the research result. In here, what you see is some examples of kidney biopsy analysis. These are from patients with different type of severity of kidney transplant rejection. Using a special staining technique, which is shown as brown color here, you can see that there's an increased amount of this inflammatory mediator SIC in the transplant kidney rejection. Next, please. And following that, the next thing is very challenging. We need to find out whether this molecule SIC is actually involved in causing transplant kidney damage. So we have developed laboratory models. One of the questions we ask is that, could that be involved in production of antibody against incompatible tissue type? And from the work of my colleague, we've shown that if we give the oral SIC inhibitor fosfamitinib twice a day, we can reduce the production of antibody that can be involved in the rejection of transplant kidney. And secondly, not only the antibody production, when we look at the histology and the function of transplant kidney in the experimental model, we see that treatment with oral SIC inhibitor reduce these abnormalities. As a result of that, we have developed an ongoing clinical trial now. It's a phase 2 clinical trial in which we actually give the SIC inhibitor orally twice a day to patients who have very challenging chronic rejection of their transplant kidney, and the clinical trial is still ongoing. Next, please. And to summarize the whole long story in one picture, so based on the study of transplant kidney biopsy from the patients and also laboratory models, will lead to the hypothesis that this is the area that we can target new drug treatment for. As a result, we have developed the current phase 2 clinical trial. And at the moment, we have recruited 8 patients, and we aim to get 10 patients altogether in this clinical trial. Next, please. And you can see this overall picture showing that what we have done so far, which is on the left-hand side, starting from the laboratory study of transplant kidney biopsy and experimental model to current phase 2 clinical trial. If the results of the phase 2 clinical trials are promising, we will move on to developing a multi-center clinical trial with the other clinicians and researchers, both in UK and abroad. And then there's a second related problem, is that a lot of young people, they actually want to have a kidney transplant, but when we assess them clinically, they have pre-existing antibodies. Some of them are because previous blood transfusion. That make it very hard for them to be matched for a donor kidney. As a result, we hope that by using a SIC inhibitor in future, we will develop clinical trial to see SIC inhibition, whether it can reduce the forming of these incompatible antibody, so more patients can be ready to receive transplant kidney. Next, please. So the work I mentioned here is through the collaboration with a lot of our patients, including advisors how to design our clinical study, my colleagues, and also funding from Kidney Research UK and generous donation from previous patients, including Minton family and the pharmaceutical industry, and also funding body from NIHR, MRC, and Wellcome Trust contribute to a lot of this work. And I'm looking forward to receive your questions.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Fred. I know only too well from my time as a transplant nurse that it would be such a breakthrough for kidney patients if we could prevent the body from rejecting the new kidney. It could prevent so many physical side effects and psychological distress, and would be one less thing for kidney patients to worry about when the list is endless. So Fred, I'd now like to ask you a few questions. I'm just checking the ones that have come in live first. Okay, so will the medication be given as standard for all transplants as an ongoing daily dose or only when rejection occurs and for a short time?
At present, our evidence suggests that we should select it for patients who have challenging transplant rejection. So it would be a subset of the patients. In longer term, there may be wider use of that because, as a lot of you realize, that it is a real challenge to design transplant medication because they do suppress our immune defense system. So I think based on our future experience, we would know whether Syk inhibition would be as good or even better than the current medications in various situations.
Okay, thank you. Another one, would you use plasma exchange with this medication?
So one can use the same time as plasma exchange, but what actually happened in our clinical trials that all the patients enrolled in our clinical trial, they have been through optimization of multiple medication as well as considered for plasma exchange. And so they have gone through all these before they consider for our current clinical trial. But of course, we are at the moment really searching for the unmet medical need area. But I think what the real question is whether this medication would come into general regime, and I think it's too early to tell at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that too. A couple more coming up. What is the realistic timeline of trials being completed and this being used, I think that says?
Yeah, so we think that we just got 2 more patients to recruit, and then for each patient on the trial, we will analyze the outcome within a year. So we're talking about, at the most, we hope 18 months from now, we'll complete this current clinical trial. And then based on that, we will certainly develop a multi-center trial to take that nearer to a clinical implementation.
Thank you. And another one, I think they're coming thick and fast for you, Fred. Will it be helpful for patients needing a second transplant?
It would be. Perhaps it would be extremely useful because we think that on the scientific basis, they may reduce the amount of incompatible antibody. And for patients who have second transplantation, they do have more antibody in the background than the first transplantation patients.
Okay, getting through these nice and quick. Another one here, a little bit different. Do transplant medications affect your testosterone?
Yeah, so now I can't speak for all the medication, but for this one in particular, we know that there's no evidence that affect the sex hormone at all.
Okay, right. Thank you for answering all of those so swiftly, Fred. Sorry, and if I could just turn to a couple of others. Can you give a time scale of when you predict SYK inhibitors may be widely used in the clinic?
Okay, so that is a fascinating question. So maybe I can explain the current use of medication. They have been already licensed in many parts of the world to use an immunological condition to deal with low platelet count successfully. At the moment, we are also involved in international development of the drug to investigate whether it help patients who have coronavirus infection, whether it will improve the long-term outcome. So I think this is a very much watch area. And as far as we know, there would be more announcement from clinical trial from America and also from UK as well over the rest of this year on whether the drug would be used for other conditions. Now for transplantation, this is interesting. What I'll share with you today is a first. It has not been used in other organ transplantation so far. So I would reckon that to be widely used in transplantation, it will take much more careful clinical trial. But the good news is that we already got the approval from the ethics committee and the industry for those patients in our trial. If they respond well during the trial, they would be allowed to enter extra 2 more years of the extended supply of the medication as extension trial.
Thank you, Fred. Now, I think you may have answered this, but if you want to add anything else, have SYK inhibitors been used to prevent rejection of organs other than the kidney?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they have not been tested yet. So I think what we're doing now in the kidney transplantation is pioneering.
Okay, thank you. And a final question, I think, unless any others come in. How long would patients need to take SYK inhibitors for, and are there any side effects?
So the side effect first, the most common side effect is diarrhea. It would affect about 10% of the patient, and most of them do settle down with hydration and dose adjustment. The other side effects are hypertension, change of liver enzymes, and most of them can be balanced by adjusting the dose and also and observation of the patient. And only about 1% of the patient would need to stop taking the drug because of those side effects. In terms of how long they take it for, we think that it would take probably about 9 or 10 months to see the clinical benefit. But having said that, I'm really preempting what we're predicting because the clinical trial is still ongoing. But certainly it's something that one needs a good duration of treatment to see the benefit.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Fred. I think most of the questions were answered, but if there are any more for Fred, we'll follow up post-event. Thank you again, Fred.
Thank you.
So we will now, let's see, now introduce you to our final speaker, who is Dr. Sean Griffin. She's a consultant nephrologist at the University Hospital of Wales. I have the pleasure of working with Sean, as we're both members of the executive board of the UK network that I mentioned earlier. So everyone has antibodies that are ready to attack infections, but they can also attack foreign tissues, such as a newly transplanted organ. Sean is leading a UK-wide collaborative programme to test a strategy to improve the transplant options for patients with very high antibody levels. Over to you, Sean. Thank you.
Much for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon and share the work that's ongoing, looking at patients who are sensitized, who are a difficult group for transplantation. And it's also great to be part of this afternoon's lineup, and I really enjoyed Mike and Fred's talk. And in fact, some of the themes that Fred alluded to lead on quite nicely to the work that we've been doing. So I'd like to start with a little bit of background to the immune system and the way the immune system responds to infections and to transplants. And so the primary role is to recognise and eradicate infections, which is clearly very important for maintaining our health. And to do this, the immune system needs to recognise our own tissues and those that are foreign and that have come into us. So we all have markers on our cells known as our tissue type, which allows us to make that distinguish between ourselves and something that's not ourselves. And so when the foreign tissue comes along, we make a very robust response to that. So it removes the immediate threat, but it then remembers that infection. So if it comes along again, we're primed and ready to respond. And so it's vital in dealing with infection, but it's also very relevant to transplantation. So when you have a transplant, you're given drugs to prevent your immune system from recognizing the tissue type of the organ. And these are very, very broad, they're very non-specific, and they down-regulate the immune system very, very generally. If you have previously been exposed to another tissue type, which can occur through transfusion or pregnancy or a previous transplant, then your immune system may already be primed to recognize those foreign tissue types, and you'll have antibodies that are already present directed against them. And so this is what we refer to as sensitization, and it can be a really big problem when we're looking at matching and performing a transplant. So when you're listed and prior to the transplant being performed, we test to see how many antibodies you have and what specificities they have in terms of which tissue type they react against, and therefore what proportion of the population they would reject. And this can actually be up to 100% of the population tissue types. And if you had an antibody against that donor, we would avoid performing the transplant because the antibodies could lead to very rapid rejection, and the kidney would fail. So if you're sensitized and you have tissue type antibodies, it can be harder to find a compatible donor, and you might therefore wait a lot longer for the offer of a transplant. You may be aware that the national allocation scheme for kidneys changed in September 2019. And prior to that, it was clear that when you had antibodies against at least 85% of the population, there was a sharp increase in the amount of time that you would wait for a transplant. And so the patients in that top 15% of sensitization were termed highly sensitized. Fortunately, with the new offering scheme, that issue has been partially addressed, and it's much less pronounced. And it's now those top 5% sensitized patients who are hardest to match. However, those patients with more than 95% sensitization are about 1 in 5 of the transplant list. So it's very common for patients to be sensitized, and even sensitized to that very high level. Another option for patients is the living sharing scheme. So if you're incompatible with your donor and you have a living donor, there's the option of finding a compatible match by looking at other couples in a similar situation around the country. But even with that, there does remain this group who have very high antibodies and can be difficult to transplant, with a small chance of finding a match. So what we're keen to look at is whether it's possible to lower the antibody levels so the sensitization is reduced and it's more likely that you'll be offered a transplant. And that was the rationale behind the ITOPS trial, improving transplant opportunities for patients who are sensitized. And so the trial ran between Cardiff, Bristol and Leeds, which gave us a good corridor up the middle of the country to recruit patients. And we recruited 26 patients who had high levels of antibodies and had been waiting for a transplant for at least 3 years. And as Mike has described, it was run as a clinical trial, so half the patients received treatment to lower their antibodies and half didn't, and with a control group for the study. So the antibodies can be removed by plasma exchange, as we've commented on during Fred's talk for the treatment of rejection. However, generally, if you just remove antibodies, they're resynthesized, and very quickly the levels bounce back up to where you start. So to drop the antibody level down and them stay there, we needed to give additional treatment to turn off the antibody production. So we've done that with 2 drugs, one called bortezomib, which targets the cells that are actually making the antibody. And then the other drug is called rituximab, and that targets the cells that are recruited to become the cells that produce antibody. And so by using these 3 levels of antibody downregulation, we're hoping that we can reduce antibody levels and they'll stay down so that it's safe for patients to receive a transplant that they might previously have antibodies against. These drugs have been used previously to reduce sensitization, and they've also been used to treat rejection due to antibodies after a transplant. But this study is the first time that we've used them in a defined protocol together to reduce antibody levels. And the funding from Kidney Research UK has been absolutely fundamental in allowing this project to take place. They have funded the support from a trials unit run out of NHS Blood and Transplant, so that there are experts in trial conduct and statistical analysis who have been responsible for the day-to-day running of the trial, and they funded all the treatment that's been involved. So the support for the study has been absolutely crucial in getting it off the ground and running. Once the patients have been recruited and received the treatment, we've then monitored their antibody levels closely for a year, so we can compare the effect between the patients who've had the treatment and those in the control group. And then we can see how long the effect has lasted over that year. We've also collected information about side effects and how patients found the treatment, whether it was acceptable or whether it was very, very burdensome, and then details of any transplants that have been performed and whether there was any subsequent rejection. So we finished recruitment of the trial in March 2020, and so the 1 year follow-up was complete in March 2021, and we're in the middle of the final analysis of the different aspects of the care and the response that we've been looking at. So similar to Mike's study, we should have news on the results in the next few months. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions about all of that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sean. I know from my work. Oh, there's a bit of feedback there. Thank you again, Sean. I know from my work as a recipient transplant coordinator just before I joined the charity that your research could mean a kidney transplant is possible for so many more kidney patients. Dialysis, although life-saving, is time-consuming and grueling. And although a transplant isn't a cure, it frees you, as Deborah mentioned earlier, from being connected to a dialysis machine 3 times a week. So totally transformative. So Sean, we've got a few questions for you, if we may. So first up, due to the lack of ethnic organ donors, will this process make it more compatible for people from different racial backgrounds to receive an organ transplant from someone who is not of the same background?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the treatment won't alter the expression of the tissue types on your cells, so you will keep that expression. But what we hope it will do is reduce the antibodies that recognize other tissue types. So for patients from a BAME background, it won't alter their tissue type and improve their chance of receiving an offer. But if they have antibodies, we hope that it will be able to down-regulate these so that it will help them receive a transplant. So it's really the sensitization question that we've been hoping to address rather than the baseline tissue type.
Thank you, Sean, and I hope that has been a satisfactory answer for whoever asked it. And indeed, if you did want any more clarification on anything anybody's asked, then please do come through to Caroline and the rest of the team. There's another couple here, Sean. Are the medications a one-off time at transplantation or ongoing?
So the treatment is given prior to transplantation. So the idea is to drop the antibody level, have it stay down, and so the opportunity for a transplant is greater. So the treatment starts with the rituximab, which removes the immature cells. We then give 4 treatments of plasma exchange. So these are given every 4 days. It's a very similar technique to hemodialysis, which separates the cells that are returned to you from the plasma containing antibodies, which is discarded. When the antibodies are removed, the cells that make new antibody are actually stimulated to produce more. So that's when we come in with the bortezomib that targets those cells. So for that cycle of treatment, patients will have 4 plasma exchanges with an injection of the bortezomib after each of them. We then paused and measured antibodies for the next 12 weeks. And if we had somebody whose antibody levels had only changed by a small amount or not at all, we offered them a second cycle of treatment, because the evidence from previous studies is that the effect is cumulative. So not responding to one cycle doesn't mean you won't respond to the next one. It means you may just need that extra round of treatment.
Thank you very much for that, Sean. Another question, in fact, another one's come up as well, but I'll ask this one first. Someone has said, I am 100% sensitized and been on the transplant list for 5 years and no luck with 6 rounds of paired and pool. As my husband is not a match, how long may I have to wait for a transplant?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that, and you are in the group of patients who are hardest to transplant. As I mentioned, the 2019 offering scheme has improved transplant rates for people like you. So those who are 100% sensitized, or those who have waited more than 7 years, in fact, or those who have difficult to match tissue types, are now given absolute priority when a donor offer comes in that might be a match for you. So previously there may be other people for whom this was a match, but whose need wasn't as great because they weren't at that 100% sensitized level. So the changes in the offering scheme have made it more likely that you're going to receive an offer, and given your history, if a suitable transplant became available, you would be very highly prioritized for it. It's worth sticking with the sharing scheme because that gives you another opportunity when a transplant might be available. And in addition to our study, there are additional studies coming on, for example, using the fostamatinib that Fred has talked about, other biological agents, and also manipulating our own immune cells to control antibody levels. And I really think that the next few years are going to be absolutely transformative for patients who are in this very difficult group. So I would stay with what you're doing, stay healthy, and your day will come.
Thank you, Sean. There's another question which I think you may have answered, but feel free to elaborate on. Would this treatment only be done for live donor transplants like plasma exchange?
No. So this is done both for those with an incompatible live donor and those on the deceased donor waiting list. So we hope that the combination of treatment will reduce the antibodies without them rebounding. So they'll have dropped down and will stay down so that it's safe for you to receive a transplant at any time rather than immediately following the plasma exchange.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, how does ethnicity influence kidney donor matching and pooling, if at all, and how?
So the two issues with ethnicity are blood group and tissue type. So transplants are nearly always matched for blood group, and those of BAME ethnicity are more likely to be blood group B, which is less common in the organ donor pool. So the blood group discrepancy is one issue. And then because there is tissue type matching, again, if the donor pool is of different ethnicity to those patients waiting to receive, then there's also a mismatch there. Again, this has been partially addressed in the new offering scheme that has put less importance on close tissue type matching as you get older. So for young patients, matching is very important because you may need a second transplant and we want to avoid sensitization. But for older people, the tissue match is less important because you will just need one transplant. And so by losing some of the emphasis on that tissue matching, it's made it more likely that people from unusual tissue type backgrounds will receive the offer of a transplant. So that's come down to the changes in the offering scheme, which have been really, really important.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Sean. That's been really insightful and helpful, and we were ahead of ourselves, so we were able to answer a lot more questions from participants. But just in case you have a question afterwards, then please pop it in the chat bar and we will follow up with you post event. So we are running, I say, just a few minutes ahead, so we can go back to Mike Nicholson with a few more questions actually that we couldn't answer, if that's okay, Mike. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Superb. So if the trials are successful, how would this be funded in the future?
Oh yeah, well, that's a good question. So it will be cost effective probably because delayed graft function costs such a lot of money. You're in hospital for longer, your risk of rejection is higher. So normothermic machine perfusion, by reducing hospital in stay will be cost effective. In a way, trials are very important, even if they show that something doesn't work, because it means you can move on to something else. And as part of our trial, the period of normothermic perfusion was very short. It's only for an hour before the kidney is transplanted. And there's ongoing research to look at perfusing kidneys for much longer periods of time, which may work even better.
Lovely, thank you. Will the transplant recipients have any possibility of future problems with antibodies in receiving others' blood via the perfusion machine?
We haven't got any evidence of that at all. We've looked for that, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. It's the same. There's a potential risk for infection. The blood solution used to perfuse the kidneys is red blood cells, so it doesn't have any plasma in it. So it doesn't have the component of blood that has antibodies in it. Although there's always a chance of getting a really minuscule amounts of antibody present. But as I say, we don't have any evidence that that's made any difference so far.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And I think this may be the last question, so feel free to take your time. Would this process be necessary for preemptive transplants? Well, I guess.
I'm not quite sure what they were asking.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just thinking actually.
Coming back to the blood question,
yes,
we're also in researching ways of not using blood, because there are some problems with blood. So we've got an ongoing project where there's a solution which doesn't contain any blood in it, and it still delivers a lot of oxygen to the kidney, so that may work as well as blood, in which case we won't have to worry about all the downsides of blood.
Okay. Thank you. And another question that just popped up as well. Does the perfusion fluid require anticoagulants, and what impact does this have for patients?
Okay, yes, it does. So that the blood is heparinized in the circuit, just as blood is when you undergo hemodialysis, else it would clot when it comes into contact with the plastic tubing in the circuit. But the beauty of the normothermic machine perfusion is the kidney is outside the body in a chamber, which means that you're just treating the kidney and not the whole person. So that dramatically reduces the risks. Whatever you're doing to the kidney, it reduces the risk in the whole person. In other words, there's less risk of so-called off-target effects, and it's a beautiful platform for the stem cells I mentioned, because if you give stem cells to a person into a vein, it goes into the whole body and is diluted. So it may not affect the kidney that you want it to do, but secondly, it may have adverse effects on other organs. So the perfusion machine completely abrogates all of that, because you're targeting the kidney because it's in front of you in the chamber, and that you're not affecting systemically the whole person that the kidney is going into. So there's much less chance again of off-target effects.
Great, thank you. Just checking one more. I'll take that one. Would this research have any kind of effect on post-transplanted kidneys for the recipients whose kidneys did not undergo this perfused donor kidney? I don't think
So just run that one by me again. I didn't quite get that really.
Would this research have any kind of effect on post-transplanted kidneys for the recipients whose kidneys did not undergo this perfused donor kidneys?
Well, it can only be done pre-transplantation. Yeah. That's the whole point of it, really. So what would we do? It's done in the operating theatre.
Yeah.
Immediately before the kidney is transplanted, for a period of time.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for coming back and answering those extra questions, Mike. Really appreciate it. So that's just about to wrap up now. Thank you so much, everybody. On behalf of everyone here, I would like to say a huge thank you to Professor Mike Nicholson, Professor Fred Tam, and Dr. Sean Griffin. Thank you for sharing your research updates and giving hope to people living with kidney disease. And a huge thank you to Deborah for sharing her personal story and journey with PKD. We're delighted that you were able to receive your transplant and get your life back, thanks to research funded by Kidney Research UK, for which we're very proud. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone here today when I say you're all very inspirational, and we're grateful to have you as part of Team Kidney. Kidney Research UK has made a pledge to transform kidney health over the next 10 years. We've recently launched our new Transforming Treatments campaign to continue our progress in transforming transplants, investing in medical technology, and bring long-awaited innovation to dialysis. Kidney disease treatments are tough. Going to hospital 3 times a week for 4-hour dialysis sessions, or being told your transplant has failed a week after the operation, is tough. One of the most common myths about transplants is that they are a cure. Currently, this is not true. On average, a transplant lasts 10 to 15 years. One of our aims is to improve transplants so they last forever and we reduce inequalities. As Health Equalities Programme Manager myself, I'm committed to addressing inequality in its broader sense, and so I've recently undertaken the personal challenge of a PhD. The subject matter is something I feel passionate about and is recommendation 7 of our Health Equalities report. It's about addressing the issue of underrepresented communities in renal research. Once addressed, only then can the results of research have real impact on every single patient. We're so grateful for everyone on this call for their ongoing support. Please help us to spread the word about the life-changing research we are funding and why it's so terribly important that we continue to transform treatments. Once again, I would like to say a huge thank you to Mike, Deborah, Fred, and Sean for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure hosting this event, and we hope to see you soon. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.